Okay, so for this first lesson, we're going to be talking about infinite limits. So the first thing to talk about is when the powers are the same in the numerator and the denominator. When this is the case, what you're going to be looking at is the numerator. Is the coefficients of both the numerator and the denominator. So let's say I have x to the n in both the numerator and the denominator, but in the numerator I have an a term, and in the denominator I have a b. No matter what comes after them, we're only looking at the highest powers in both the numerator and the denominator. Just make sure you're paying attention to whether or not they have them in order. It's not always the first thing, but it is always the one with the greatest power. In this case, when you have an infinite limit, then this would be equal to, when you take the limit as x approaches infinity, then you end up getting a over b. In the case where the power in the numerator is greater, so let's say you have x to the n plus 1 and x to the n. Since the numerator is growing faster, the limit as x approaches infinity will also approach infinity. Just make sure you're paying attention to the signs if you're plugging in negative infinity, or in case there might be a negative coefficient out in front. You need to pay attention to both of those. So after that, when the power of the numerator is less than the power of the denominator, so if you have x to the n and x to the n plus 1, in this case, since the denominator is growing faster, the limit that we would be approaching is actually going to be 0. And when you think about the reason why, you're cutting up a pizza into more pieces. So as you cut it into more pieces, the pieces get smaller and smaller and smaller. If I was sharing one pizza with 4 people, I think we'd be okay. We'd still probably be pretty hungry. But if I was sharing one pizza with an infinite number of people, we're basically getting nothing to eat. So that's where we get the idea that the limit as x approaches infinity in that case would be 0. So let's take a look at all of these examples here. So the first one, I noticed that the powers are the same, so I'm going to look at the coefficients. So my imaginary coefficient here is 1 and 1, but there is a negative out in front. So I just take the coefficients, so that would be -1. In the next example, the highest powers, so I'm just looking at these two terms. The denominator has the highest power, therefore this is going to be approaching 0. The next one, we have the highest power in the numerator because this is all just over 1. So since the highest power is there, when I plug in infinity into this first term with the highest thing, it would go towards infinity, but there's a negative in front. So it goes towards negative infinity. This last one, when we're looking at the highest powers, the numerator has the very highest power. So therefore, when I plug in infinity, the numerator is growing fastest. So it goes towards infinity.